Thank you so much for joining us, dear viewers. This is our weekly program, Talk to OBN. I'm on the move by hosting this program. Have a good time with us. And today I'm joined by John Philpot International Lawyer. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this program, John Philpot.
I'm honored to be with you.
Just to start with, what is your comments on the suspension of the HR 6600 and its implication in general?
Well, I think it's important, sir, to understand why HR 66 and the 3199 are very serious. They are attempts by the United States government to dictate from the USA all your policy. And since November 2020, your policy, you have had an uprising, different forms of uprising by the previous government, which was voted out in last June. So it's a question of national sovereignty. If there was an uprising in Florida, the US government would put it down. No one can tell them not to do it. So your government has to protect its borders, its national unity, and it cannot be separated or broken up unless everybody agrees by a referendum or something, Now, your government fought very hard, and they pretty much won the war in November 2021. I don't have the exact dates, but you fought back the TPLF. Now, the USA realizes, because it was supporting the TPLF, and when you look at human rights, the USA, I don't think they believe in human rights. They believe in power and influence for themselves. But if someone wants to ask a question, maybe they do care. Well, what did they say about the TPLF? They talked about it as a minority victim of genocide. They said that the Ethiopian government was committing genocide against the Tigray people, which is false. It was probably a bit in the other direction. And I don't know all the details about the war, but it's very clear that the TPLF, as an illegal armed rebellion, attacked civilians, destroyed hospitals. I think there was even sexual crimes. I understand there were sexual crimes. I'm not an expert on all the irregularities. So your government has a right to suppress that. And you'll remember that there was a problem of humanitarian aid. And what I understand, what I read was that in the humanitarian aid, they were shipping arms. That's what I read. And that's a problem when you have, and the term unfettered access is a term which comes up in both the bills, which means they want to have trucks going in and out of the contested areas without the government inspecting every square centimeter, cubic centimeter of the trucks, which of course any government does. I live in Canada. If I take a truck 100 kilometers to the US, they can inspect my truck. And if they find marijuana or drugs in my truck or guns, they will seize the truck. So why should these rules not apply to your country? They also want to prevent your country from doing business with other countries. Now, already you're under sanctions with the AGOA, all right? And you have opportunities in your region and in, shall we say, north and east of Ethiopia of doing business with United Arab Emirates, Iran, China, Russia, Turkey, which is north of you, right? And they want to control who you do business with. And they want to impose sanctions. And they also, and I think we'll get into this later, want to impose an external human rights investigation, which maybe that'll be a subject we'll deal with in a few minutes, I think. So that is where, that's the legislative plan by the USA in a nutshell. Of course, it's more complicated, but no, it's not that more complicated. But it's a form of trusteeship or legal control, and trusteeships were something which existed at the early part of the last century, when they had either colonized or areas were under trusteeship. Ethiopia wasn't fully colonized, but most of Africa was. So this is the tendency that the US wishes to impose upon your country. Now, there is an intense lobbying effort. I want to explain something. I'm Canadian. I'm Québécois. I'm from Quebec. I speak French and English. I speak French in my work. But I understand that there's intense lobbying effort by Ethiopians in the diaspora, and it's competing lobbying with the TPLF. The TPLF is lobbying, and they appear to have suspended the study of 6060. But from what I understand, Bob Menendez of the Senate insists on advancing with 3199. So the danger is there, and it's a real danger. Personally, I can't evaluate the legislative process in the USA. I have some idea about my country, but it's very important for Ethiopians in the diaspora, and I consider for your country to be very clear that this legislation is unacceptable. Some people say no more. That's a common theme. In a lot of the world, people are saying no more in different ways. They're saying it in Latin America, they're saying it in Africa, they're saying it in China, and the answer is no more, in my opinion. That's the modern tendency in the world, and it can make a big difference to your country, which, I'm not an expert on Ethiopia, but you're 115 million people. You have a lot of poverty. You have social problems. You have electricity. You have potential. I think your government and the people close to the government understand there's a lot of potential. So it's up to your government to decide, and not Washington. That's what I think international law says. We have fought for sovereignty. The United Nations Charter was adopted in 1946, a few weeks before I was born, long before you were born. But that's the rules. The rules is that countries cannot interfere in the internal affairs of another country.
First of all, why the US government suspended the draft bills? What do you think is the reason behind this?
Well, the US is in a crisis now. There is a international military and economic crisis. Your government has probably sent the message that there's something wrong with this bill. I'm sure they've said it to them. I know the diaspora has said it's wrong. All right. And I know in the Human Rights Council in the UN, people have opposed the creation of this Human Rights Committee. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but your government is not very favorable to this Human Rights Committee entering on Ethiopian soil. So it's a political pressure. There's some success, and it's some success, but I know in my own view of the world, nothing's done till it's done, right? And this has been going on for, well, this latest war has been going on for a year and a half now, more or less, since November to April, a year and a half. And the war is going on still. I know one of my good friends from California, Ann Garrison, is in Ethiopia right now. There's a lot of fighting going on, as I understand, and maybe the U.S. doesn't know exactly what to do. But we have to be careful. If you look what they have done in the past, they have supported the TPLF. They've never withdrawn their support for the TPLF. It's still there. Maybe they're trying to get some concessions out of the government. I know your government is intelligent. I'm sure they know what they're doing. And what I'm talking about are things which should be supportive of your government and strengthening the point of view in international law of the rights of Ethiopia and the rights of the US. The US has no rights to intervene and tell your country what to do. And remember, we're not talking about just this year. We're talking about when your kids get older and when you get older, the next generation, they want to be able to eat, study, enjoy life, be prosperous, live better, decide on their future. Those are the crying crises in 2020 or 2022,
The UN is about to send its impartial investigators to Ethiopia, and that makes sense for you.
No, it doesn't make sense for several reasons. First, you had a joint human rights investigation with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN High Commission, which covered up until the 28th of June, 2021, as I understand. They did a credible job. They pointed out wrongs on both sides, and they made recommendations. They can continue, and the advantage of that is that you had local Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which contributed. So it's not an intervening in your sovereignty, and this should be continued. And it's very important that people who understand your country can run this. I'll give you an example. What about me? If I came to your country as an investigator, how could I really make a recommendation? How would I really understand unless I'm closely supervised by an Ethiopian person who explains? I've been in other countries. I've been in Africa 40 times. I've been a lot in Kenya. I've been a lot in Tanzania and in Rwanda. Foreigners don't understand countries, just like you would not understand what's being said here in Quebec today and tomorrow. I could come as an advisor in law. Now, add to that the makeup of this committee. Now, the two bills we're talking about talk about accountability. Accountability means you have to answer on questions of rights, human rights. Who is going to be the chair? Fatou Bensouda. She's African, but has she worked for Africa? No. She was the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for 8 years, or 9, June 2012 to June 2021, 9 years. She only charged Africans. And let's talk about another country which was held up by the International Criminal Court. Some of us like to jokingly say International Colonial Court. All right, it's a word game. In 2010, Laurent Gbagbo was elected. I'm sorry. The Constitutional Court said it was him who should be president. France didn't like it. So France arrested Mr. Gbagbo for the ICC, International Criminal Court, and took him to The Hague. And they took also Mr. Ben Goude, a minister in his government, and charged him with war crimes, genocide, because there was some violence. The case, how can you explain it? He was charged in 2010-11. At the International Criminal Court, you have to justify the charges. It's called confirmation. It's not a trial. They look at the evidence and say, is there enough evidence to go to have a trial? They failed. There was not enough evidence at the first. The judges looked at the evidence and said, okay, no, this is not enough. They gave them more time to get more evidence. The prosecutor is Madame Fatou Bensouda. Then they held a trial, and it's a bit like the US or Canadian or British system, common law system. The prosecutor makes its evidence. It lasted for about 3 or 4 years. And at the end of the prosecution case, they say, this is our evidence. What do the judges say? Let them out. You have not proven your case. He does not even have to respond because there's evidence is zero, insufficient to find him guilty. This was in 2019. This prosecutor, she did everything she could without evidence to keep Mr. Gbagbo in prison. And Mr. Gbagbo could have been like Mr. Abe. All right? Now, so she is not a friend of Africa. She can work with lies. And she went on appeal and tried to block his release. And he was ordered released, I think, last April. Someone can correct me on the date, the month exact. I don't have the exact month. He was ordered released, and he was kept out of politics. He's a political leader. He's a political leader like Mr. Abe, who wanted to make his country better, because all of Africa, I understand now, from what I can see, is trying to improve the life of Africans, and he was kept out for 10 years. So you can't trust her, because there are people in Africa who work for the West. Neo-colonial approach, neo-colonialism. The other two people is a Madam Betty Murungi, and I can't say a lot about her because there's some verifications that someone is making about her, but she was in the Kenya human rights investigation in 2010, and she left that job under shady circumstances. I don't want to say more now because I don't have all the information. But then she worked in Rwanda, and I don't know whether you realize the relationship of Rwanda with the TPLF. Paul Kagame is a very strong supporter of the TPLF. And the third man is an American, and he is a professor of law. Are professors of law independent and free? Well, I guess if I was a professor of law, which I'm not, I could be free because I'm pretty free in my approach to politics and law. This man was a consultant to the State Department in international law. And the US State Department, in both those bills, they have to consult the US State Department. So this Human Rights Committee is nothing more than an attempt to impose unfair results and let the US State Department decide based on their recommendations that your government is not doing a good job. And remember, what the US wants is the TPLF either to have power or to have tremendous influence or to separate. There's different ways in which your country can be weakened. And in the last 30 years, there have been a lot of problems of potential balkanization or breaking up of viable countries. And it's very, it's pretty easy to see that in, for example, the Congo was a big country and there's attempts at balkanizing it, and it can't unite. Countries with all that potential are divided, and in spite of all the wealth, they're very poor. The Sahel in Africa, in northern Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso is afflicted by terrorism. So those countries are fragile. We saw that Yugoslavia, you were very, very young or not born yet, was broken up into pieces from 1990 to 2000. So there's all these risks which your country can face by external forces. And it's not sovereign. It's not up. I understand that in your country there are a lot of different groups and there's different tendencies. It's up to your country to decide how to get along with each other and not have a powerful, wealthy American and British or European, but more American, coming and favoring one side and saying you have to let the TPLF be part of the government, be half the government, separate, have a decentralized structure. And those are all things which I can't decide for you.
What would be the next step for the US government about the Ethiopia's case? And do you think that they would lift up the allegation or imports from Ethiopia or continue threatening this country by the name of or by the cover of sanctions and draft bills?
Well, sanctions are very common now. The US uses sanctions all over the world to try and break up and destroy countries. They want to make the people suffer because they think that if they make the people suffer, they will rebel and overthrow the government. That, to me, is wrong. It doesn't work either. Venezuela has been under terrible sanctions. Iran, North Korea, Syria is under terrible sanctions after 10 years of war. And now we see the sanctions on Russia, which are supposed to weaken Russia. Now that's another question, which I can tell you what I think about it, but I don't think it's the topic of our present discussion. So the danger for your country is sanctions. You're already sanctioned. Your AGOA, your privileged access to the US market has been withdrawn. And I understand that it's economically creating economic difficulties in some of the industrial parks in your country.
Well, the bill drafted to use all developments in legal tools to stabilize the country or Ethiopia. In sanction or do you believe that the sanction is a diplomatic way of solving some problems or crisis in one country? Do you believe on that way?
No, it's not. Sanctions are illegal. And the General Assembly of the United Nations in December 2020 voted 70% to reject what they call unilateral coercive measures, which is another word for sanctions. Sanctions are illegal because a country like the United States or Europe or England or France says, if you don't follow this law, this rule, we will prevent you from developing. The only way that can be done is through the United Nations Security Council. When there's a big war problem and they say by a majority vote with no veto that it's important, you have to impose sanctions on a country. Any other kind of sanctions are illegal, and it's been very popular in the US since 2014, although Eritrea has been sanctioned, I think, since 2009. And so one of the major struggles in the present period is against sanctions. And you and I will have an interview in 6 months. I'm joking now. And we will see whether the US has imposed sanctions on your country, because they might, but if your country makes it very clear that it's not acceptable, and the people, the Ethiopians in exile oppose it, it can be stopped or can be mitigated. And so it's to a certain extent, your country is winning its battle. I can't, because they won the war, although there's a lot of pressure coming on still. And, you have now you have the dam, which gives you a lot of potential. And so you're standing up to them, but you have to still develop your country. And I understand there's a lot of fighting going on, which obviously is not a good thing at all. And that's not the way to make a country function, by having fighting. But it's not up to the US to decide. It's up to your country to decide. It's up to you, your friends, your government, your friends in Tigray, the people. I don't even know whether you're Tigrayan or not. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. To get along and find a way to live together.
In general, what is expected from the government of Ethiopia, friends of Ethiopia, and Ethiopians living in different parts of the world? What should be the next step?
Well, first, I am Canadian, and so I can only approximate what I think. I cannot give your government directions and orders, and there are ways in which your government has to deal to become sovereign. Personally, I think it's important for your government, which is being attacked right now, to establish its power. It's your government which decides. Secondly, and I think your government has already said so, this Human Rights Committee should not be allowed in the country. It's one of the first steps to stand up. Many Ethiopians I speak to are trying to avoid a system which there's too much decentralization in your country, and they want to have, they don't want to have different ethnic areas where it's just one ethnic group which oppresses another. I think that we have it here in Canada. We have a dispute about this kind of issue in Canada. I think you have to live, all groups, ethnic groups and races have to live together, and not, it's wrong for me to say because you're black that you shouldn't have certain things, and it's someone who's more Asiatic and more Arab looking shouldn't have a different rights than you do. And people, you understand, like it's not, shouldn't be based on race or ethnic affiliation. It should be based on how you can contribute to your country. But and then there's issues of language, of course, which language for different regions has to be allowed to develop. But I can't give your government a lesson on that. They know, I'm sure.
Good. John Philpot, an international lawyer, thank you so much for your time.
Well, I'm very pleased to be with you, and thank you very much.
All right.
Goodbye.
If viewers, this will bring us to the end of this edition. Till the next edition, have a good time.